Well, just about everybody has heard about the deep state now, the swamp out of Washington, D.C. filled with corruption and abuses of power. And more people are recognizing the need to drain the swamp and to dismantle the deep state. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is how to do that. One of the reasons that it's become so apparent is because it has affected just about everybody now, with oppressive taxation and regulation, reckless and wasteful spending, corporate bailouts and welfare, a greatly devalued dollar, unconstitutional wars, progressive nationalization of healthcare, education, police, etc., attacks on religious freedom, morality, privacy, property rights, freedom of speech, gun rights, etc. The list of abuses and encroachments on our liberty could go on and on. Americans have increasingly seen international bodies telling us what to do. We've got presidents legislating by executive orders. We've got a federal judiciary that is made up of activist judges issuing radical decisions. We've got a Congress that thinks they have an unlimited spending limit and are burying us in debt. And we've got state and federal government, or state and local governments that are becoming increasingly dependent upon the federal government. So, what do we do about this? Some people say we have runaway government. Okay, so if we have runaway government, what has it run away from? And what it's run away from is the Constitution. The Constitution doesn't allow all that stuff. History is not kind to people who allow a government to grow out of control and become abusive. Lord Acton said, "Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." But let me just ask, how many people here believe that our government is following the Constitution today? Oh, I don't see any hands going up. Well, how many people believe that if we change the Constitution, they will start following it? That doesn't seem very logical, does it? That's what some people advocate, though. So they also say that the system is broken. Well, what does that even mean, the system is broken? The Constitution isn't broken. The problem is that they're not following the Constitution. I want to illustrate this with something called the Freedom Index that every American should be aware of. The Freedom Index is a congressional scorecard based on the U.S. Constitution. It's published twice a year by the New American Magazine. And in the Freedom Index, it contains 10 votes for the House of Representatives and 10 for the U.S. Senate. It explains each of the bills, how it squares with the Constitution or not, and how it affects your freedom. And then it shows how all 435 members of the House and 100 senators voted on each one of those bills. So you can see who's upholding their oath to the Constitution and who's not. And there are some good guys in there, but there's not enough. What is needed is a simple majority. 218 is a majority in the House of Representatives. If you had 218 representatives uphold their oath to the Constitution and vote against all unconstitutional bills and spending and so forth, it would dramatically reduce the size, cost, intrusiveness, and abusiveness of government. So 218 is the target. You may not be able to do anything about 218 congressmen, but you can do something about yours. And that's what we're going to be talking about. You can educate the electorate, educate the voters in your district so that they can hold their elected representatives accountable. That's the solution. Unfortunately, many Americans and many members of Congress have no idea how to rein in big government, how to dismantle the deep state. Congress has the power, and just to illustrate, give you a couple examples here of what a majority in the House of Representatives could do. And if you had a majority in the House, you would also then, for all the voters in those congressional districts, they would also vote for U.S. senators, for presidents, they would vote for state and local officials, and it would turn the country around. So it's those voters in those districts that gets back to being the solution. If that happened, you had the majority, the power and duty of Congress is to, one, regulate the courts. So these activist judges could be reined in. The House of Representatives controls the purse strings, so the House of Representatives can stop all of the executive branch agencies that are abusing power by simply withdrawing their funding. Congress can also impeach any federal official. You think there's any federal officials that are connected with the deep state and the swamp that needs to be impeached? Absolutely. There's a there's a whole lot of them that need to be removed. There's a whole lot of undoing that needs to go on. But the people need to be aware of what the responsibility of their Congress is. The Congress has the power to fix our government, to rein it in and get it under control. And the people have the power over their Congress. The entire House of Representatives and 1/3 of the Senate answers to we the people. They are up for re-election every 2 years, which means we the people have the power to fix our government by fixing our Congress anytime that we decide. So this kind of points to where we need to go with the solution and what the root of the problem is. I want to start with a quote from James Garfield. This is before he was our president. When he was a congressman, he said, "Now more than ever before, the people are responsible for the character of their Congress. If that body be ignorant, reckless, and corrupt, it is because the people tolerate ignorance, recklessness, and corruption. If it be intelligent, brave, and pure, it is because the people demand these high qualities to represent them." So he nails it, where the problem is and where the solution is. It's in we the people. We have the ability to hold our elected representatives accountable, and whenever we choose to, we can fix our government. Now, there was a time before we had all these problems. In 1831, Alexis de Tocqueville, a French political theorist, visited America to try and discover what made America so unique and so great. And here's a quote from Alexis de Tocqueville of what he found in America. He said, "Every citizen is taught the history of his country and the leading features of its constitution. It is extremely rare to find a man imperfectly acquainted with all these things, and a person wholly ignorant of them is sort of a phenomena." If only that were the case today, we wouldn't have the problems that we have. So civic virtue, civic responsibility used to be an American value. When's the last time you even heard those terms? So the solution is to restore that civic virtue and civic responsibility, civic knowledge among the people. So we've discovered what the root of the problem is. The government doesn't play by the rules because we the people don't know the rules. We've allowed the government to grow out of control, and we keep electing congressmen even after they violate their oath of office. If they violate their oath, we should replace them. It's that simple. So the solution then, learn the rules. We the people must learn the rules. This is the whole purpose of the John Birch Society, is to educate and inform the people. And so we produce all kinds of material that's all available at shopjbs.org. One of the highest recommended things that you can start with is this DVD set called The Constitution is the Solution. It's a 6 DVD set, and it does not go through all kinds of constitutional trivia. Instead, what it does is it looks at the most crucial areas that the Constitution is being violated, that the majority of the American people don't really understand, and if they did understand, we would very easily and quickly be able to fix the majority of our nation's problems. So, highly recommend that. Another one is this book, The Federalist Papers. This was written by 3 of our founding fathers, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay. And it was actually a series of letters to the editor to explain the proposed Constitution to the people so they could decide whether or not they wanted to ratify it. And so this collection of letters to the editor were compiled in this book called The Federalist Papers, which is an excellent resource for understanding our Constitution. So I'm going to start with a quote from the Federalist Papers here, and I'm going to provide several quotes out of the Federalist Papers during the presentation. But this first quote comes from James Madison, who's called the father of the Constitution because more than any other man, he was responsible for that document and for our system of government that has been such a blessing to America. And in this quote from Federalist number 45, he's giving a very simple description of the way our system of government works. He said, "The powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite." So the balance of power in this arrangement under our Constitution is that the weight of power belongs to the states, and few and defined powers were given to this new federal government. he goes on to explain. He says the federal powers will be exercised principally on external objects as war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce. So basically, federal powers had to do with national defense. And then he explains, the powers reserved to the several states will extend to all the objects which, in the ordinary course of affairs, concern the lives, liberties, and properties of the people and the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the state. So what he's describing is a concept known as federalism, where you have this division of power between certain bodies of government and others. The federal government has these few and defined powers. The states have all the powers then that were not given to the federal government. So imagine a time and imagine a future in America where the federal government basically just provides national defense, leaving the people and the states alone, leaving us free. There would be competition among the states. They would be trying to see who can be the best one, who can attract the best people. Now, if your state was one that had very low regulations and very low taxes, it would attract a different type of people than a state that had many regulations and controls, a nanny state with redistribution of the wealth. And over time, it would become very obvious to all which state worked best and where everybody would want to go. Today, because we've allowed our federal government to get out of control, it's becoming more and more of a socialist system with a centrally controlled economy, one-size-fits-all policies imposed upon everybody, and oppressive regulations and controls imposed on businesses and people. This is not the way our system is supposed to work, and it's up to we the people to correct it, to get informed and make these corrections. So I'm going to illustrate this a little further with jurisdiction and federalism. So I've described the federalist system that we have. So each branch, each division, each department of government has jurisdiction that is given to it either in the federal or state constitutions. And so their jurisdiction is all the power that they have. If they reach into some other sphere and try exercising powers that were not delegated to them, that's called a usurpation of power. It's a power grab. And of course, we know that's over the past several decades and longer, the federal government has been usurping more and more powers from the states and local governments. So let me just give a quick illustration so you can see how it's supposed to work in a federalist system. Let's say that the state of Wisconsin, the state legislature, passes a bill declaring war on Canada and tells the president to go execute this war. Well, what would be the response of the president? Well, he would respond about like you guys. Everybody's kind of laughing and chuckling because, well, that's not the way it works. Why? Because the states nor the president were given the power to declare war. That power was given to Congress. So if somebody tries to exercise a power that's not given to them, it's up to the other parties, the other departments to reject it, to oppose it. And if the president were to uphold his oath of office to the Constitution, he would follow the Constitution and reject and ignore and oppose that kind of a usurpation. So let me flip it around on you. And let's say that an executive branch agency, we'll pick on the EPA, passes regulations telling your state how to manage its natural resources. What should be the response of the local and state officials? Well, everybody who takes an oath to the Constitution, their oath is to the Constitution and not to the EPA. So they should obey the Constitution, which delegates zero power to the executive branch of the federal government to tell states how to manage their natural resources. And so they should ignore it, they should laugh at it, they should block it and oppose it if they're going to honor their oath to the Constitution. Now, that sounds shocking if you were taught by government schools and you listen to the neoconservative and liberal media. That is startling. That's not how our system works. That's how far we've come. What I've just described is exactly the checks and balances that our founders envisioned, that you should have been taught in civics class, but you weren't. So this is your civics class. So this is the way it's supposed to work. Now, you might be skeptical, and that's natural if you've never heard this before. So I'm going to provide some documentation and quotes establish that this is exactly the way our system is supposed to work. So first of all, the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution says the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So again, in our Constitution, we list the powers that are given to the federal government. If they exercise a power that's not on the list of powers delegated, that's a usurpation. We didn't give them the power, so they can't do it. They can only do the things on the list. Everything that is not delegated to the United States government is reserved to the states and to the people, respectively. That's the way our system works. That's a restatement, really, of exactly what James Madison described in Federalist 45 in the quote that I gave you earlier. So this brings us to Article 6 of the Constitution, which says, in part, this Constitution, and this is just Clause 2, this Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, shall be the supreme law of the land. So this is what's known as the Supremacy Clause. Now notice it didn't say that the federal government is supreme over the states and the people. It said that this Constitution and the laws made in pursuance thereof are supreme. So what about the laws that are made in violation thereof? They are not supreme. They actually have no standing. And so how do we respond to that? That's what we're going to be talking about. But first of all, this is what makes the United States of America a republic and not a democracy. This is rule by law as opposed to rule by men. It's not majority rule. It's not the whim of politicians. It's the Constitution holds our government accountable. It tells them what powers they have. It actually doesn't hold them accountable. It's up to we the people to hold them accountable to the document that they swore an oath to uphold. So what's the difference between a republic ruled by law and a democracy? A quote from Benjamin Franklin, at least it's been attributed to him, describes it very well. He said, democracy is two wolves and a sheep voting on what to have for lunch. What are we going to have for lunch in that kind of a scenario? You. A government of wolves that are wanting to devour your wealth, that wanted to violate your rights, all of the abuses of power and corruption that we listed at the beginning of the presentation, that's what you have in a democracy. There is no security for the rights of the minority because majority whims and arbitrary politicians can trample on your rights. So that's why we're not a democracy. Our founders abhorred democracy and they gave us a republic, thankfully. The founder of the John Birch Society, Robert Welch, was fond of saying, this is a republic, not a democracy. Let's keep it that way. We want to keep the rule of law. So let's go to the next clause of Article 6, Clause 3, which reads in part, the senators and representatives before mentioned and the members of the several state legislatures and all executive and judicial officers, both of the United States and of the several states, shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support this Constitution. So this clarifies the duty of everybody who takes an oath to the Constitution to uphold the laws made in pursuance thereof and to uphold the Constitution, to restrict their power and their jurisdiction based on what is defined in the Constitution, and to not usurp powers that are given to others, and then to oppose usurpations coming from other departments or branches of government. That is the duty that everyone who takes an oath to the Constitution possesses. So we gave several examples at the beginning of our presentation about the deep state and the swamp and the problems that it's creating for the people. If our elected officials simply uphold their oath to the Constitution at the local, state, and federal level, it solves the problems. We did not set up a government. Our founders didn't set up a government to be a tyranny, to oppress the people. We had just overthrown that from Great Britain. They set up a government limited to its proper role of protecting the God-given rights of the people. And that's the government that we want to restore in America and limit it to the proper role. So the founder's solution is constitutional enforcement. It's local, state, and federal officials, whether they're judicial, legislative, or executive. All officials who take an oath to the Constitution simply upholding their oath. But it's up to we the people to hold them accountable to that. We can't turn our back on them with all that power. We have to hold them accountable. So let's get some additional quotes from the founders to dive in a little bit deeper on what this looks like and how we can rein in the federal government. So first of all, from James Madison in Federalist 45, he talked about how the founders expected the people and the states to be alert in the case the Congress shall misconstrue part of the Constitution. Congress would never do that, would they? They're doing it all the time. Well, if they do, and they exercise powers not warranted by its true meaning, he says, state legislatures should be ever ready to mark the innovation, to sound the alarm to the people, and to exert their local influence in effecting a change of federal representatives. A remedy must be obtained by the people who can, by the election of more faithful representatives, annul the acts of the usurpers. Have you heard any state legislators sounding the alarm about your federal representatives violating the Constitution and trampling on the powers that have been given to the states? Not too much. The biggest problem here is partisan politics. Because of the two-party system, if it's the other party that is violating the Constitution, they'll condemn that. They'll sound the alarm over that. But when it's people of their own party, they're very hesitant to sound the alarm. So that has been very destructive to our system of government, where they will lay silent and allow federal representatives from their own party to violate the Constitution, violate the rights of the people in the states, and not say anything about it. Whereas the states, according to our founders, it's their responsibility to do something about it, to sound the alarm. And we need leaders at the state level who will do that, who will help to educate the people and lead the people in rejecting unconstitutional federal usurpations. So another quote, this one from Alexander Hamilton in Federalist number 33. He said that federal acts which are not pursuant to its constitutional powers will be merely acts of usurpation and will deserve to be treated as such. So these are some quotes backing up exactly what I was describing earlier about how the acts of usurpation, if they are committing doing things that are not delegated to them, then that is a usurpation. So those acts of usurpation are not pursuant to the Constitution. They're in violation of it, and they deserve to be treated as such. What should be the response? Well, let me give you some more. Part of the answer, in Federalist 16, Hamilton says, if the state legislatures be necessary to give effect to a measure of the Union, they have only not to act, or to act evasively, and the measure is defeated. In other words, if the Congress or some federal bureaucracy starts issuing dictates to the states or to local governments telling them you need to do this, that, and the other thing, all they have to do is not act. Ignore it. Act evasively. Oppose it. Reject it. Don't comply with a tyrant. The way that they've grown over the years is by grabbing power, and if nobody calls their bluff, then they grab more power, and they grab more power. And the big concern over the recent decades has been the federal government. But what is growing in concern is we've got international bodies doing the same thing. And we all need to understand this, we the people, and we need to educate our local and state officials to reject these power grabs, these usurpations by either federal or international bodies. It's their duty, according to the oath they take to the Constitution. So that's part of the solution, is they can just ignore them. They can just not comply. So taking it a little bit further, in Federalist 46, James Madison describes, the means of opposition to it are powerful and at hand. The means of opposition to these usurpations. He says, the disquietude of the people, their repugnance and perhaps refusal to cooperate with the officers of the Union, the frowns of the executive magistracy of the state, the embarrassments created by legislative devices, which would often be added on such occasions, would present obstructions which the federal government would hardly be willing to encounter. The state governments, with the people on their side, would be able to repel the danger. So the solution is we the people, working through our elected officials at the local and state level, can repel the danger of these usurpations, of the deep state, of the swamp that is encroaching on our liberty. We have the ability to do that. Now, the executive magistrate of the state that he mentions is the governor. Governors have tremendous influence in standing up to the federal government if they'll only use it. But one of the points that is made is they need the people on their side. We need an informed electorate, the people to understand these things so that they demand that their elected representatives at every level follow the Constitution. One of the other things that he mentioned was legislative devices. So that's the state legislature and things they can pass. So let's let Thomas Jefferson describe that for us. In the Kentucky Resolutions of 1798, he said, "Whensoever the general government assumes undelegated powers, its acts are unauthoritative, void, and of no force." Explaining just like what we've been saying. But he goes on, he says, "Where powers are assumed which have not been delegated, a nullification of the act is the rightful remedy. That every state has a natural right in cases not within the Constitution to nullify of their own authority all assumptions of powers by others within their limits. That without this right, they would be under the dominion, absolute and unlimited, of whosoever might exercise this right of judgment for them." So he's saying that every state who's part of this compact, the Constitution, has the power to nullify, to reject and oppose usurpations of power. And they have the right to make that judgment in each state. If they were subject to allowing others to make that judgment of what constituted an encroachment, they would be under tyranny. And that is not the system that our founders set up. All you got to do is read through your Constitution, read the Federalist Papers, and you'll find very clearly that is not the system that we have. We have one where the states and the people are supposed to be a check against federal tyranny and to hold them accountable. All right, one more quote from on the solution here, and this one's from James Madison in the Virginia Resolutions of 1798. He says, "The states who are parties thereto, of the Constitution, have the right and are in duty bound to interpose." Okay? So let's define this interposing. To interpose means to place between. So what Madison is referring to is the duty of government, local, state, and federal, to protect the God-given rights of the people by placing itself between them and any encroachment. In this case, encroachment by the federal government. This is the proper role of government, is to protect our rights. And so whether it's local or state or federal, they are supposed to place themselves between us and any encroachments on our rights. And nullification, just to sum this up, is the power and duty to nullify every unconstitutional act, not only by refusing to implement it, but also by declaring it null, void, and of no force within a jurisdiction. So local state governments have the power to rein in the federal government. It's just simply a matter of doing it. This requires an informed electorate. In summary, every local, state, and federal official, including police and military, who has sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution, is duty-bound to oppose laws not made in pursuance of the Constitution, as well as any other unconstitutional acts of the federal government or international bodies. That's how we restore federalism, freedom, and prosperity, drain the swamp, dismantle the deep state. It all starts with you. So Thomas Jefferson provides some more great advice for us, because that all sounds good, but how do we do it? He says, inform the electorate. He said, "I know of no safe depository of the ultimate powers of the society but the people themselves. And if we think them not enlightened enough to exercise their control with a wholesome discretion, the remedy is to inform their discretion by education. This is the true corrective of abuses of constitutional power." So that is the solution, is to inform the electorate. And again, this is the purpose of the John Birch Society. We have the National Concerted Action Game Plan. We're building a national network of chapters. We want one in every community. We've got the action and education tools to go out there and educate and inform, first of all, yourself, and then your community leaders, business leaders, elected leaders, people of influence, so that we can turn this thing around and save our country and restore the freedom that we inherited. So we invite you to join the John Birch Society. Become a part of the solution. Help us bring about less government, more responsibility, and with God's help, a better world by providing leadership, education, and organized volunteer action in accordance with moral and constitutional principles. So we've got the tools that I encourage you to check out and inform yourself so that you can inform others. That's how it starts, and it starts with you. Visit jbs.org to learn more. Thank you very much.